All right, in chapter 22, now we are going to focus on our respiratory system diseases. So starting first of all, we're going to differentiate between upper respiratory tract infections versus lower, and there'll be a couple that can affect both the upper and the lower. So first of all, what we mean by the upper respiratory tract is essentially everything above the lungs. Okay, so this part, so mouth, nose, sinuses, throat, epiglottis, and the larynx. Now, whenever we get to the trachea, now we're going to separate into the lower respiratory tract. So trachea, the lungs, the bronchi, and all the parts of the lungs would be included in the lower respiratory tract. So the defenses, a lot of it is anatomical. So the nose hairs help trap in various microbes so they can't penetrate through. On the trachea and the bronchi of the lungs, there's ciliated epithelia that is shown here. So cilia are short projections that stick out of these cells, and they can move and they kind of beat back and forth. But mainly what happens, as you can see here, is that the bacteria get trapped, so that prevents them from getting into those lung tissues. The beating of this is also what ultimately is going to help remove mucus that's secreted by those cells, and then through coughing and sneezing, then that mucus that traps in some of those microbes would then be expelled from the body. In addition, swallowing as well. So some of that mucus would be removed, other times it gets swallowed, but in either case, it would be destroyed or removed from the lung tissue. Now, the normal biota of the respiratory tract, there's actually a large number of commensal, meaning both are benefited due to constant contact with the environment. So constantly as we are breathing in various microbes. There are about 9 different bacterial genera. So again, not just specific microbes, but genre like Staphylococcus is a genre. So there are multiple genera of bacteria that make up a significant part. As far as fungi, even Candida albicans can colonize the upper respiratory tract, so more like in the nose. So some of those yeast cells can actually normally reside there. Again, the importance of the normal biota is that microbial antagonism. So it takes up space so that the pathogens can't attack. They outcompete, so they use up nutrients that help prevent pathogens from gaining a foothold or from getting into our tissues. Now, a lot of the normal biota can actually cause disease. So this would be more opportunistic. So if something happens and these would get out of hand or they move to a new location, then they would be able to cause disease. And that includes strep pyogenes that causes strep throat, Haemophilus influenza, strep pneumonia, Neisseria meningitis, and Staph aureus. All of these are thought to be part of our normal biota, but again, they are kept in check whenever our immune system is functioning properly. But if we take antibiotics or different treatments, we have another disease, it can allow these to grow out of their normal range and lead to infections. So the diseases, first of all, the upper respiratory tract. So there are 4 that we'll talk about. So rhinitis, or the common cold, sinus infections, ear infections, and infection of the throat, so pharyngitis. So starting first with the common cold, again, also called rhinitis, so which just means nose and inflammation. So this is very common. We all typically suffer at least 1 cold a year, but just to kind of put it into perspective, it does have a significant impact. About $40 billion in medical costs is spent on the common cold, millions of missed days of work as well. So it does have a significant, thankfully not fatal outcomes, but it does significantly impact our daily lives. The other issue with the common cold is that it predisposes patients to secondary infections. And again, what that means is somebody would get a cold, they would have an infection, but then again, due to that normal biota, it allows other bacteria to grow out of control. So you may start with a common cold, but end up developing pneumonia or end up developing a sinus infection or an ear infection. Those will be secondary infections. And the symptoms from the common cold are actually due more to the immune response to the virus than actually the virus being all that harmful. So again, inflammation, fever, cytokines being released. So the damage due to the immune system in this case is actually more harmful than the virus itself. Now these viruses, there are about 200 different kinds of viruses that can cause the common cold. The majority of them are rhinoviruses, coronaviruses, and adenoviruses. We'll also talk separately about RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. This is more of an issue in infants than with adults. All of them, again, because they're viral, they are transmitted by droplet contact or indirect transmission. So again, touching a doorknob or touching a table or something that somebody has sneezed on, and those viral particles have landed there. For the cold, there's not a vaccine, and mainly because, again, typically not a serious issue. It's also because it's caused by so many different viruses, it's like impossible to vaccinate against them all. And there's really no specific chemotherapeutic agent, no specific drug for the common cold. Typically, the symptoms are what are treated. So again, taking Tylenol or acetaminophen, ibuprofen, any of those help bring down a fever, help with runny noses like pseudoephedrine, things like that. So treating more of the symptoms than actually targeting the causative agent. Now, sinusitis is just a sinus infection, so infection of the sinuses, inflammation of those sinuses. This can actually be an allergic reaction as well, or an infection. So of course here with micro, we're mainly focusing on those infectious states that lead to sinusitis. However, again, allergies can cause inflammation of the sinuses as well. And typically, patients who have a cold will also develop sinusitis. Again, it's a secondary infection that just includes pain there in the sinuses, pressure, toothaches, and it causes a discharge of opaque or even yellow-green discharge or mucus from those sinuses. Now, the causative agent pretty much goes back to the common cold. So all of the majority are caused by viruses, and it's the same as those that cause the cold, because again, it's mainly a secondary infection to the cold. There are some bacterial causes, though, that are from the normal biota. Again, they get out of hand, but that's only about 2% of the cases. And again, some rare fungal infections, whenever antibacterials fail to get rid of the symptoms, it's indicated to be fungal instead. Now, ear infections, this common sequela of the common cold. So again, secondary infection, again, due to inflammation. So it's not the virus or the bacteria or anything specifically, it's part of the immune response. So that inflammation of the sinuses or inflammation of the ear. In this case, the eustachian tubes build up fluid in that middle ear. That allows bacteria to migrate along there and increase the inflammatory response. Secreted fluid is then effused, so that exudate of gunk that gets accumulated due to that inflammatory response. Also, that extra fluid allows for biofilm production. So usually this biofilm, especially with chronic infections, that buildup of fluid allows lots of different bacteria to attach to the inner ear. And those biofilms make it extremely hard to treat because, again, it's hard to get into them. It's a mixture. It's hard to treat all of the organisms in that biofilm. So that can lead to kind of persistent or chronic ear infections. Now, the causative agents, just like we had seen before, it can be the same as those that cause a cold. However, the most common cause is a bacteria, Streptococcus pneumonia. Again, as it implies, it causes pneumonia, but it can also lead to ear infections. It is a gram-positive diplococci, meaning, again, it's two circles that are attached together, like we've talked about with Neisseria. This is actually becoming an alarming little worrisome part that some ear infections are actually caused by Candida albicans, that fungus. Again, kind of part of that normal flora can be, but again, makes it a little harder to treat. But it can also be caused by lots of different viruses and bacteria. Again, the same that cause the common cold can lead to that. But again, the most common that we talk about is Streptococcus pneumoniae. Again, some growing concern about the fungal infections in the ear caused by the Candida. And it is not communicable. And again, that just means it can't be passed on. So it's not transmitted from person to person. And again, it is mainly a secondary infection after somebody has a cold or similar infection. So our table here, again, Streptococcus pneumonia, of course, is a bacteria. It produces a capsule and hemolysin that can break down those red blood cells. Again, it typically becomes endogenous because, again, it's part of our normal flora. But once it gets into a new location or goes out of control due to the immune system being compromised while it's fighting a cold or something, allows it to grow out of control. Prevention, there is actually the vaccine to pneumococcal conjugate vaccine. It's more for pneumonia. However, because it activates and provides immunity to this microbe, it does help prevent ear infections as well as a secondary kind of effect. Typically, treatment though is going to be antibiotic against these bacteria. Now, the Candida aureus, again, this biofilm formation especially allows it to cause chronic infections. Again, made up of a mixture. Again, unknown exactly how it gets in there, how it's transmitted. Typically, could be part of the normal flora, but again, it has that ability to form those biofilms, and there's not a great treatment plan because of that. All right, so then our last one here in the upper is the pharyngitis, essentially sore throat, so inflammation of the throat, again, caused by the same viruses as the cold. However, we talk more about two of them in particular because they're the serious cases. So Streptococcus pyogenes, so strep throat is still just a pharyngitis, like you have a sore throat with a cold, but whenever it's mainly due to Streptococcus pyogenes, we call it strep throat. Another more serious one is Fusobacterium necrophorum. And so we'll talk about both of them, but first starting with strep pyogenes, which we've talked about before with our skin infections. This is a gram-positive coccus, so we see it up here. So we have our DNA inside, our ribosomes, we have our thick cell wall because it's gram-positive, so lots of peptidoglycan. But then it also has a few virulence factors. So again, this M protein fimbriae, various antigens that are on there. It can produce that hyaluronic acid capsule, helps it attach. It also has that lipoteichoic acid that's in all gram-positive cells. But that ability to produce the capsule and slime layer helps it attach and evade the immune system. Now, also here with strep pyogenes, if untreated, some more serious infections can occur. It can lead to scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, and glomerulonephritis, which affects the kidneys. So again, some of these virulence factors, the surface antigens look like host proteins, so our immune cell thinks it's a self cell. It also helps them resist phagocytosis. The surface antigens also protected against lysozyme because it hides the peptidoglycan that it targets. It produces a couple toxins, so streptolysin O and S, that cause injury and tissue damage. It causes erythrogenic toxin. This is the lysogenic strains of this, so again, it causes lysis. And this is actually what's really important to leading to the scarlet fever if untreated. And then some of them are also those superantigens that overactivate the immune system. Now, the Fusobacterium, so in recent years, this has actually been recognized as being potentially dangerous in about 15% of acute cases. It is gram negative. It causes, the reason for this is because it causes these paratonsillar abscesses that are called Lemierre's syndrome, and this can be life-threatening. So again, both of these types, the strep pyogenes and the Fusobacterium, there are other causes of a sore throat, but whenever these occur, they can lead to more serious outcomes. Again, our table here. So again, strep pyogenes, Fusobacterium, both bacterial. They can be transmitted, the strep by droplets or direct contact. Now the Fusobacterium is actually usually endogenous. So again, what gets out of control when our immune system gets declined, again, a secondary infection due to a cold or something, allows it to grow out of control. And then there are viral forms, just like, again, the common cold. So all forms of contact with that. Now, as far as virulence factors, again, lots of them here with our strep that we've talked about before. Again, it produces various proteins or antigens on the outside to make it look like the host. That M protein fimbriae, the capsule, different lysogens or lysozyme toxins. It can be superantigens. So again, it allows it to be very pathogenic. It is treated, though, by penicillin and those similar antibiotics. Now, the Fusobacterium, again, it's evasive. It can avoid the immune system, and it produces that endotoxin that gets released. Also can be treated with penicillin.